I never paid much attention to the weird theories you find online. Sure, I'd scroll through conspiracy videos on YouTube or get lost in Wikipedia rabbit holes late at night when I couldn't sleep, but that was just entertainment. I never thought there was anything to it. That all changed a few weeks ago. I found myself browsing the dark web, not for anything illegal, just out of curiosity. If you know where to look, there are forums full of wild ideas, things you'd never hear about on regular websites. Leaked government files, obscure studies, bizarre philosophies. It's like digging up forgotten secrets. One night I came across a thread called "The Dead Internet Hypothesis is Wrong. We are the ones who are dead." At first I thought it was just another take on the whole "we live in a simulation" theory, but it wasn't. The poster, someone named Exit Protocol, wasn't talking about glitches in reality or AI taking over. They were talking about death and brain activity. I was hooked. They explained something I'd heard before, that the brain stays active for a few minutes after death. Some studies suggest up to 10 minutes. But Exit Protocol took it further. They said that during those last moments, the brain doesn't perceive time the way we do when we're alive. What if, they asked, all of this, everything we're experiencing right now, is just the final flickers of our brain before it shuts down for good? What if we're already dead? At first it sounded crazy, but there was something about the way they wrote it. It wasn't dramatic or trying to convince me. It was calm, like they were just sharing an idea. And that's when it started to feel unsettling. The post listed examples of things that felt wrong, how time itself seemed strange, how the past 5 years felt like a blur, like they belonged to another lifetime. Even the internet felt off. You know what I mean? The way discussions play out, the way content spreads. It's all repetitive, like a machine trying to keep us engaged, but with nothing new to say. Exit Protocol claimed that this is because the brain, in its last moments, is collapsing under the weight of trying to make sense of the inevitable. The internet, it's just fragments of thought looping endlessly. The theory said that reality was breaking down, and the closer we get to the end, the more obvious the inconsistencies become. Mandela effects, time distortions, events that seem too perfect, too scripted. It all felt a little too real, a little too close to things I'd noticed in my own life. That night, I tried to shake it off. I mean, it was just another strange theory, right? But as I lay in bed, one thought kept creeping in. What if I wake up tomorrow and none of this is real? The next morning, I woke up expecting things to feel different. I thought I'd have some kind of strange revelation or an odd shift in reality, but nothing happened. I felt fine. Everything seemed normal. At first, I almost felt stupid for letting some dark web theory mess with my head. The internet is full of weird ideas after all. Half of them are just made-up nonsense for attention. But even as I went through my usual routine, making coffee, scrolling through my phone, I couldn't shake this strange feeling. It wasn't fear or paranoia, but more like something was missing. Like I was forgetting something important, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried to ignore it, went to work, sat through meetings, scrolled through Twitter during my breaks. Just another regular day, but that nagging feeling stayed with me like a thought stuck at the back of my mind, one I couldn't quite grasp. Then, on my lunch break, I opened Reddit, like I always do. That's when I saw it. A new post in a philosophy subreddit I follow. The title grabbed me. Does anyone else feel like reality has been off since 2016? I clicked on it, half expecting the usual stuff. Vague nostalgia, complaints about the pandemic, that sense of burnout everyone seems to be feeling. But one of the top comments stopped me cold. It was from a user named Theory Void, and it said, "You're not imagining it. We are at the end of the signal." The phrase sounded too familiar. It was exactly what Exit Protocol had written. That was when I realized this wasn't just some isolated theory. It was everywhere. It wasn't just one person thinking this way. I went back to the dark web forum that night, hoping to find the original post. It was still there, just like I'd left it, but this time there was something new. The post had been edited, not to change anything, but to add a final sentence. If you're reading this, you're already past the threshold. No explanation, no context, just that one sentence. It felt like it was meant for someone, like it was meant for me. At this point, I had a choice. I could ignore it, chalk it up to coincidence, and move on with my life, or I could dive deeper. I chose the latter. I started searching for more people talking about this theory. I scoured forums, Twitter, even old conspiracy subreddits. The more I looked, the more I found. People describing how time felt different, how events seemed to unfold in strange ways, and most unsettling of all, how there were gaps in their memories. Moments that should have been significant, but now felt like they were just skipped over. Some of these posts had no dates, no timestamps, like they'd always been there or had never existed at all. I even went back to that Reddit thread later that night to reread the comments, but when I looked for it, it was gone. Not deleted, just gone. And that's when it hit me. I couldn't remember what I had eaten for lunch that day. I spent the next few days trying to make sense of everything. My mind was all over the place. Dark web theories, disappearing posts, missing memories. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't ignore the oddities. Something was definitely wrong. That night, lying in bed, I scrolled through my phone, trying to distract myself. That's when I saw something that made my heart stop. A comment on a completely unrelated Reddit thread. It said, "You're not supposed to be looking for this." The username? Exit Protocol. The exact same name from the dark web. I clicked on the account, but it didn't exist. The comment was there, but the account was blank. No history, no information. It was like the account had never been real. When I checked the timestamp, it said it was posted just a minute ago. That didn't make sense. If the account was deleted, it should have said so. But there was nothing. I refreshed the page and the comment disappeared. I started feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. I needed a break, so I walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water, but when I came back to my room, something weird happened. My phone was still on, and there was a note open in the Notes app. I hadn't opened it. The note was blank except for one line: "You have less time than you think." I didn't know what to make of it. It was like my phone had written it, or maybe someone or something had written it for me. I tried to push it out of my mind, but then I started thinking about something I'd read before: near-death experiences. People who claim to see a bright light and feel peaceful as they die. Some scientists say it's just the brain shutting down. But what if it's more than that? What if that experience, the white light, the memories replaying, isn't the end? What if it's happening right now? I couldn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, but because I kept thinking about everything I'd read and all the things that didn't add up. The more I tried to focus on my past, the more everything before 2016 felt fuzzy, like a dream I couldn't fully remember. I called an old friend the next day, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, and asked if he remembered the things we used to do back in high school. He laughed and said, "Man, I don't even know. Feels like another lifetime." That's when I realized it wasn't just me. If Exit Protocol was right, we weren't living anymore. We were just reliving the last moments of our consciousness. And the brain didn't want us to know. It was filling in the gaps, hiding the truth, so we wouldn't realize what was happening. But the more we noticed, the harder it was to keep everything intact. I stopped trying to explain it away after that. I realized I was stuck. The cracks in reality were real. Maybe we don't have much time left. Maybe it's minutes, maybe years, or maybe none of it matters. All I know is that reality is fading, and when it's gone, we'll fade with it. I'm not a hacker or anything. I'm just a regular guy who spends way too much time online. That's how I ended up exploring the dark web. It wasn't for anything shady at first, just curiosity. You hear all these rumors about the dark web being full of criminals and illegal stuff, but the truth is, most of it's just scam websites and nonsense. Still, one night I found a site that caught my eye. It was called Skeleton Key Market. The name alone felt creepy, but I clicked on it. The website was simple, just black boxes with item descriptions and prices. And what they were selling was even stranger. Old keys, safe keys, elevator keys for high-rise buildings, even master keys for hotels. The site claimed they gave you universal access to places you weren't supposed to go. I figured it was a scam, but the reviews were oddly specific, too detailed to be fake. Then I saw something that made me hesitate. There was a listing for residential skeleton keys. They claimed these keys were pulled from unsecured municipal databases, and each one would open at least one house in your city. I didn't know why I clicked on it. Maybe I was just bored. Maybe I wanted to see if it was real. I paid $50 in Bitcoin and selected my city. A week later, I got a small padded envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a plain silver key, no markings or engravings, just a small tag with a number on it. I didn't think much of it at first. I threw it on my desk and went about my day. But a few days later, I noticed something strange. The number on the tag matched my neighbor's house number. Let me explain my neighbor. His name is Mr. Holloway. He's an older guy in his mid-60s, lives alone and keeps to himself. He's the kind of person who does the same thing every day: early morning walks, grocery runs, and lights out by 9 p.m. Nothing exciting about him. But the weird thing was his basement window. Every night, without fail, there was a strange blue glow coming from it. It wasn't the kind of blue you get from a TV or a computer screen. It was a weird, almost fluorescent blue. I didn't think much of it at first, but the longer I lived next to him, the more curious it became. Sometimes I'd hear strange sounds late at night, humming electronics, fans running, and what sounded like metal scraping against metal. I never asked him about it, of course. It wasn't any of my business. But now, staring at that key, I couldn't shake the thought, what if this actually worked? That night around 1 a.m., I found myself standing outside Mr. Holloway's house. I wasn't planning on breaking in. I just wanted to test the key. If it didn't work, I'd throw it away and forget about it. But when I stepped up to his door and slid the key into the lock, it fit perfectly. My heart was pounding. I turned the key and the lock clicked open. I froze. There was no way this was his house, and no way this key from some shady website was opening his door. But it did. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I pushed the door open slowly. Inside, everything was too clean. It wasn't the kind of clean an older man who lives alone keeps his house. It was sterile, almost staged. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something else I couldn't place. The furniture didn't look like it was lived in. It looked like it was just there to fill space. There were no personal items, no photos on the walls, no books, no shoes by the door. It felt more like a rental property than someone's home. As I moved through the house, I noticed something strange. There was a door to the basement. It was slightly ajar and the blue light was spilling out. It was the same eerie glow I'd seen from outside. I don't know why I went down there. Maybe curiosity, maybe a weird sense of dread, but I did. I crept down the stairs, gripping the railing as my breath became shallow. When I reached the bottom, I turned the corner and what I saw shocked me. It wasn't some hobbyist's workshop or a storage room. It was a full-blown industrial laboratory. Metal tables were covered with documents, monitors displayed biometric data, and the walls were lined with glass containers holding preserved specimens. I stepped closer to one of the tables, my eyes scanning the papers. They had government letterheads and official seals. One of the files caught my eye: non-human subject research. Anomaly 17.I. Picked it up, my hands shaking. There was a blurry photo of something that wasn't human. It had long limbs, smooth skin, and where its eyes should have been, there was just emptiness. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some private research project. This was something bigger. Government-level research, the kind that shouldn't be happening in an elderly man's basement. I stepped back, trying to process what I'd just seen. That's when I noticed something else. A heavy-duty metal door at the far end of the basement. It had an electronic lock, and as I got closer, I felt cold air leaking out from beneath it. I bent down to listen at the vent, and that's when I heard it. Slow, steady breathing. It wasn't human. I should have left. I should have turned around and never looked back, but I couldn't. I had to know what was behind that door. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to back away slowly, not wanting to make a sound. I left the basement, locked the door behind me, and walked back across the street to my house, but my mind wouldn't let go of what I'd just seen. The lab, the government research, the thing behind that locked door. I couldn't stop thinking about it, but at the same time I was trying to convince myself it was just a bizarre coincidence. Maybe I was overthinking it. The next day I did what I should have done from the start. I Googled Mr. Halloway. I found almost nothing. No social media accounts, no job history, nothing. The only thing I found was a blurry old photo from a university webpage from 19987. It listed him as a biochemist who worked with a government research team on an unnamed project. The names of the other scientists were on the list, but when I tried to look them up, I hit dead ends. 3 of them had no records, 1 had an obituary from 1996, and the last one had been missing since 2003. That's when it hit me. If Mr. Halloway had been part of a government project, then what was he still doing here in this house, all alone? And if he'd been involved in something like that, why was there a fully functioning lab in his basement? It didn't add up. I went back to Skeleton Key Market, the dark website where I'd bought the key. I checked my order history, but there was something wrong. My transaction was gone. There was no record of me ever buying the key, no receipt, no confirmation, nothing. But my Bitcoin wallet had been charged. I had definitely paid for it, but now it was like it had never happened. That meant someone was covering their tracks. I watched Mr. Halloway more closely after that. His routine hadn't changed. Still the same walks, the same grocery trips, and still every night the blue light glowing from his basement. But then, something changed. One night, I saw the upstairs light turn on, long after he usually went to bed. I saw a shadow moving past the window. It wasn't him. That night, I couldn't stay away. I went back to his house, not to break in again, but to see what he was doing. I waited until 11 p.m. when the upstairs light turned on. I carefully crept around to the side of the house and peeked in through the window using my phone's front camera. For a second, everything looked normal. Just papers on a desk, a cluttered room. But then, I saw it. On his computer screen was a live security feed from his basement. He was watching it, and the camera was focused on the metal door. It unlocked and something was coming out. Mr. Halloway didn't react. He just watched, like this was part of his routine. I couldn't breathe. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. What was going on in that basement, and why was he keeping it a secret? The next morning, I convinced myself that I was just overthinking everything. I wasn't involved. I wasn't part of this bizarre situation. But that night, I made one last discovery. I'd thrown the key away. I had dropped it in a storm drain, and I didn't want to see it again, but when I walked back into my room, I saw it. The same key, sitting on the floor in front of my door. I didn't pick it up. I didn't want to. I just stared at it, knowing that whatever I was supposed to be a part of, it wasn't over yet. And that's when I realized I couldn't escape this. I've always been a curious person. It started with the little things, random facts, strange occurrences, things most people wouldn't even notice. I'd read about them on the internet, get lost in articles and blogs, and even dive deep into forums where people shared weird experiences. It was fun, like a hobby, but then something happened that changed everything. I was scrolling through an old, obscure forum late one night when I found a thread that caught my attention. The title was simple, The Vanishing Room. No fancy theories, no cryptic titles, just that. I clicked on it, thinking it might be about a ghost story or a strange event, but it was something else entirely. The original post was about a man who described an odd experience. He said he had stayed at a hotel for a weekend, and the second night he went back to his room after dinner and noticed something off. The room looked exactly the same as it had when he left, but something felt wrong. The door was slightly ajar, even though he had locked it when he left. He thought he was just being paranoid, so he closed the door, but when he walked in, the room felt too small, like the walls were closer than before. The bed, the desk, the furniture, it all looked the same, but it was almost like it didn't fit the space anymore. The man said he couldn't shake the feeling, so he left the room and went down to the front desk to tell the staff. They assured him that nothing was wrong and that it was all in his head. But the next day when he went to check out, he was told his room number didn't exist. The hotel had no record of a room 218, the room he had stayed in. The staff insisted that no such room had been rented, and no one had checked in that night. He was left with a feeling of confusion, like something had been erased from existence. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. The post was written like a personal story, no over-the-top claims or wild embellishments. It was just a simple account of something that didn't make sense. And what got to me the most was the author's final line. I've stayed in other hotels since, but I keep finding the same room in different places. And every time it's different, but it's always room 218. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had read. The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. I searched through the forum for any other mentions of similar experiences, but most of the posts were scattered and vague. Some people shared stories about things disappearing or rooms that seemed to change overnight, but nothing as specific as what I'd read in that thread. So I did what anyone else would do in my position. I started looking into it myself. I didn't expect to find much, but I was curious. It was like something was pulling me in and I couldn't let it go. I decided to take a weekend trip to a small town not far from where I lived. I hadn't planned on doing much, just a few days away from the city, away from the noise. I checked into a modest hotel on the edge of town. The front desk was manned by an older woman who greeted me with a friendly smile and handed me my room key. It was room 218. I laughed to myself, thinking about the thread I'd read, but I figured it was just a coincidence. When I walked into the room, everything looked normal. The bed, the desk, the small TV on the wall, it was all standard. But when I sat down at the desk, something felt off. The room felt too quiet, too still, as if it wasn't really mine. I shrugged it off, unpacked my bags, and went out to grab dinner. When I came back later that evening, something strange happened. The door was slightly ajar again, just like in the story. I immediately thought of the thread I'd read. I locked the door, double-checked the lock, and stepped inside. Everything looked exactly the same. But when I sat at the desk again, I noticed that the furniture felt different. The chair was a little too far from the desk, and the bed was positioned in a way that made the room feel smaller. It was like the room itself had shifted. I couldn't explain it, but the feeling of unease grew. I left the room again, walking down to the front desk to ask about it. The woman at the desk looked at me like I was crazy when I mentioned it. She assured me that nothing had changed, that it was just my imagination. But when I asked about room 218, she froze. Her face changed just for a second. Then she smiled and said, "I'm sorry, we don't have a room 218 here." I stared at her, confused. I checked the key in my hand. It was still labeled 218. I tried to shake it off, but it felt like the room was fading away from me, like the walls were closing in. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was trapped in that same room. I didn't know if it was a glitch, a mistake, or something worse. All I knew was that I was beginning to wonder if I would ever leave it. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about what had happened at the front desk. How could they not know about room 218? And why did it feel like something was wrong with the room itself? I kept getting the feeling that the walls were closing in, that the room was getting smaller and smaller, even though nothing had changed. I had to get out of there, so I grabbed my stuff and decided to leave. When I reached the lobby, the woman at the front desk wasn't there anymore. Instead, a young man was working. I walked up to him and asked for my checkout. He looked at me, then looked at the computer and said, "Room 218, right?" "I'm sorry, but we don't have a room 218. We only have 218s and 218s and 19 dot." I froze, staring at him. I showed him the key. "Room 218 dot." He didn't even seem to be confused. He just calmly asked me to return the key and told me I had been in room 218 and told me I had been in room 218 dot. I told him I was sure I'd checked in to room 218, but he only smiled and handed me my receipt. I was done. I grabbed my things and left, but when I looked back, the hotel seemed different. The building was still there, of course, but it looked faded, like it didn't belong in this town. It felt like something was missing, like the whole thing had been part of a dream. The drive home was quiet, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That room, the key, the strange sense that something wasn't right. I kept replaying the conversation with the man at the front desk. Was it real? Had I imagined it, or was I losing my mind? When I got home, I checked my phone for any notes or photos from the trip, but there was nothing. No pictures from the hotel, no messages.